Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a dramatic reading of an allegory, a story called The Curious Case of Button-Up. It's inspired by F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, but takes us on a journey through a very different kind of reversal.
Oh, yeah.
A societal one.
It's a story that's really more than just a simple tale. It's a reflection of those broader societal trends, that commentary on the things that are shaping our world.
Right. And the story itself, it's set in 2009, that pivotal year, marked by the inauguration of the first non-white president, a time of just immense change, but also a time when you started to see some simmering resentment brewing in certain corners of society.
Yeah. And it's against that backdrop that we're introduced to our main character, Benjamin, and the button-up movement that he's leading.
Yeah, the button-up movement, it really taps into that resentment. It promises this return to a simpler time, maybe even an idealized past, even if you know that past wasn't so good for everyone.
Yeah, that classic yearning for the good old days. But what makes this story so interesting is that we've got these puppet masters lurking behind the scenes, shaping Benjamin's message and manipulating the whole narrative for their own benefit.
So get ready for drama, intrigue, and maybe even a few chills as we dive into The Curious Case of Button-Up. I'll start us off. In 2009, as the crowd cheered the inauguration of the first non-white president, a man named Benjamin watched from the shadowed halls of a private mansion. His eyes shone with the dim light of a television screen, reflecting not the joy of progress, but the simmering resentment of a distant past. That night, Benjamin became the face of a new movement, though not its brain.
Benjamin was wealthy, charismatic, and to many, charmingly offbeat. To his followers, he was the ideal candidate to bring America back to its roots. To the intellectual elite, he was a madman, a loose cannon with an arsenal of dogmatic, childlike statements that resembled the Crayola 8-pack of simplicity. Yet, unknown to all but a select few, Benjamin's words were more than spontaneous nonsense. They were carefully planted seeds, curated by shadowed handlers who crafted his every move and statement, feeding him just the right amount of flattery to keep him on their course.
The media couldn't get enough of him. Every night, he graced the news, his voice loud, his gestures wild, his words riddled with contradictions. The pundits laughed, the analysts scoffed, and the journalists sneered.
But Benjamin's base grew steadily, fed by the emotional fervor of those who saw in him a way back to the good old days, an escape from the complexities of modern life. Each rally was filled with followers who cheered him on, clinging to his promises of simplicity.
Behind Benjamin, unseen hands pulled the strings. They knew his weakness as well. The need for constant praise, the hunger for attention, the ego that could be stoked with a few whispered words.
He was the perfect face, a puppet who believed he was a master. And as he spoke of returning to true American values, those hands moved in the background, weaving a complex web designed to undo decades of progress.
The movement that took root called itself Button-Up, a nod to the classic story of a man aging backward. The irony was not lost on Benjamin's handlers. Their mission was to push America back in time, to strip away rights and freedoms that had been fought for, to dismantle the progress made by women, people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and laborers.
They wanted America to button up in every sense, to return to a time of hierarchy, obedience, and rigid social roles.
Each day, Benjamin grew bolder. He began speaking of American purity, of restoring the nation to a separate but equal structure. His speeches were peppered with nostalgia for a time that most Americans under 50 had only seen in black and white photos. Segregated schools, curtailed immigration, gender roles set in stone. And as he spoke, his followers cheered, their faces lit by a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. They didn't want to go back to the past. They wanted to live there.
Meanwhile, the real architects of Button-Up operated in the shadows. They were corporate giants, political strategists, and tech moguls who knew that power in the digital age came not from force, but from information. They weaponized technology, flooding social media and news feeds with carefully curated content.
Algorithms pushed propaganda at a breakneck speed, targeting each person's unique fears and biases, creating echo chambers that reinforced the movement's message. What had once been a land of free thought and open discourse now echoed only with Benjamin's voice and his carefully constructed vision of the past.
As Button-Up grew, it gained control over a major political party. Soon, its ideology was no longer a fringe belief, but a force within state legislatures, where lawmakers introduced bills to roll back social programs, defund progressive education, and restrict immigration to all but those deemed desirable.
State by state, Button-Up, infiltrated local governments, taking control of school boards, judicial appointments, and public health departments.
In the capital, Benjamin's handlers moved him like a pawn, feeding his ego, keeping him insulated from dissenting voices. His rhetoric grew more extreme, his speeches more incendiary. By the time Button-Up held sway in Congress, Benjamin's words had become gospel to a third of the country who saw his critics as enemies of the state. They believed he was bringing back the real America, the one that lived in their grandparents' memories and their parents' stories, a land of order, discipline, and unyielding tradition.
The last barrier was the White House. When Button-Up finally seized it, the movement's vision came fully into focus. Immigration policies changed overnight. Refugees and asylum seekers were turned away. Un-American books were removed from schools, replaced by a curriculum that glorified America's past without question.
In public spaces, voices of dissent grew silent as Button-Up's tech partners employed new surveillance measures, facial recognition, biometric tracking, and social media monitoring under the guise of public safety. For the first time, citizens were made to fear not just their actions, but their very thoughts.
Benjamin, ever the figurehead, basked in the admiration of a country that was finally his. He reveled in the adoration, unaware that he was merely the smiling face of a darker vision.
His handlers remained behind closed doors, unseen and untouched, as they manipulated the system to consolidate their power, cutting away the safety nets and freedoms that had once defined America.
Yet, beneath the carefully constructed facade of unity, dissent simmered. Groups of young activists, historians, journalists, and lawyers met in basements, small cafes, and encrypted online forums. They knew the history that Button-Up sought to erase. They understood the cost of returning to the past, and they vowed to resist. In their hearts burned a hope that one day the country would shed its oppressive buttoned-up facade and step forward, not back.
But for now, Button-Up stood triumphant. With every law passed, every restriction enforced, every freedom taken, America turned the clock a little further back, slipping ever closer to a forgotten time. The story of Benjamin Button had been reversed. Instead of one man aging backward, an entire nation was now regressing, step by step, toward a past that was as dark as it was simple.
Ooh, quite a journey. I don't know about you, but that's a story that sticks with you.
Yeah, it really does. And that's what's so powerful about allegory, right? Like, it holds a mirror up to society. It makes us really think about what's going on around us.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that really struck me was how it captures that allure, of simple solutions in these really complex times. I mean, Benjamin's message, it really resonates with those who feel like things are changing too fast and just want to go back to how things used to be.
Right, like this yearning for a golden age, which, probably never even existed.
Yeah.
But it's powerful, and people can really exploit that, especially when people are, struggling or feeling afraid.
Yeah, and the story, it doesn't shy away from showing how that manipulation happens. Like these puppet masters behind Button-Up, they feed Benjamin's ego and carefully craft his message to really play on people's fears and anxieties.
It's chilling. It reminds you that people who want power, they really understand how people work. They know how to make you feel insecure and then step in and act like they have all the answers.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole thing about misinformation, especially in the age of social media, like how algorithms can be used to create echo chambers, reinforcing those biases and silencing anyone who disagrees.
Yeah, it's like this digital hall of mirrors where everything is distorted.
And that distortion, it can have really serious consequences in the real world. Like in the story, we see how Button-Up uses that misinformation to gain control and roll back all that progress.
It's a cautionary tale. It makes you think, like, how can we protect ourselves from these forces? How do we become more discerning about the information we're taking in?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think part of it is media literacy, being able to critically evaluate what we read and see, recognizing bias and seeking out different perspectives.
Right, and also just having a healthy sense of skepticism, questioning people who offer easy answers, or try to paint everything as black and white.
For sure. And I think most importantly, being willing to have conversations with people we disagree with, listening to different viewpoints, challenging our own assumptions.
Recognizing that the world is complex, there aren't always easy answers. Because ultimately, the story of Button-Up is about what happens when we stop thinking critically and just hand over our agency to people who claim they have all the answers.
It's easy to think of the curious case of Button-Up as just a story. But it really does make you think about the world, doesn't it?
It does. It's a warning about how the desire for simple answers and longing for the past can be exploited. and that we need to be aware of those forces.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that really stood out to me was the role of technology in shaping how people think. The way the story shows how those algorithms and social media can create these echo chambers and amplify all that misinformation. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is one of the most concerning things about our world today, right? And there's just
Yeah.
so much information coming at us all the time. It's really hard to know what to believe.
Exactly. And the story really shows how people who want power can manipulate all that information to divide people and undermine democracy.
It's a good reminder that we have to be really careful about what we consume online, to question things and seek out different perspectives. You can't just believe everything you see on social media.
Right. And I think the whole idea of nostalgia being dangerous is also really interesting. The way the button-up movement taps into that longing for a simpler time. Even though that time might not have even been that great, it's such a powerful way to manipulate people.
Yeah.
Because it plays on their emotions.
Yeah, nostalgia can be tricky because it tends to ignore all the bad stuff that happened in the past, the injustices and the complexities. We can't romanticize history and just yearn for some bygone era.
So what can we do? How do we stop history from repeating itself?
Well, I think we have to learn from the past. Like in the curious case of Button Up. We should be wary of leaders who offer simple answers or appeal to our fears and prejudices. Don't trust anyone who promises to bring back a golden age, especially if that golden age never really existed.
Right. And we have to be aware of how technology can be used against us. We can't be passive consumers of information. We have to engage with it, question it, and find different viewpoints.
And most importantly, I think, we all need to feel responsible for the future. We can't just rely on other people to protect our freedoms and democracy. We all have to play a role in shaping the world we want to live in.
The curious case of Button Up is a story that's going to stay with me. It reminds us that we're all part of this story, and the choices we make today are going to shape our future.
For sure. It's a call to action, a reminder to be vigilant, informed, and engaged citizens. We have the power to resist those easy answers and to create a future that's more just, more equitable, and more hopeful.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the curious case of Button Up. We hope you found it thought-provoking. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.